Hello and Fáilte. I am here today with my very good friend and fellow teacher at the Irish Pagan School, Orlagh Costello. And we are going to talk today about flame keeping. Or flame tending. It is a very, very common practice for followers, for modern pagan followers, for Brigid, the goddess Brigid, or even Saint Brigid in some cases. So I thought I would get the native Irish expert that I trust the most, let's just say, on matters of Brigid. Orlagh has taught at the Irish Pagan School 2 classes now on Brigid, 2 classes on Brigid and 1 on Catholic magic, and definitely more in the pipeline. So if you're more interested in this, definitely go and check out the introduction to Brigid would be a good place to start. So Orlagh, how do you feel about flame keeping? What's your experience of it, both working with the Irish pagan community and as an Irish pagan yourself? Maybe let's start with what's happening at the moment, just for people who are not familiar.
Okay, so flame keeping is the practice of tending a flame or a fire of some description for a day and a night, and people usually do it either by themselves for 19 days or in groups of 19, with the idea that Brigid will look after the flame on the 20th day. And it's meant to be part of a devotional practice to Brigid. And it comes, so it had died away, right? We've got some stories that it did happen way back in medieval times. So prior to the Reformation, the foundation in Kildare was still there, and there was still practicing Brigidine nuns there, as far as we can tell.
Okay, what kind of year are we talking about here, or what kind of time period?
Well, there's two kind of periods we're looking at, right? The first period would be that shall we say, the spiritual lineage from Brigid, Saint Brigid, down through, carried through until about 1132, when the abbess of the abbey was raped by a local soldier, and so lost her spiritual, I guess, superiority. Well, superiority is not the right word, but her leadership role because of that. And she was replaced by a relation of the...
Whoa.
Yeah, no, hang on. Let me finish the sentence, right? She was replaced by a relation of the nearby political leader, shall we say. I don't like using the word kings in these times. So that she was raped is stated quite clearly. The reason that led to her being demoted is not stated clearly in any way, shape, or form that I can find. But like from the context that she was replaced by someone who was a relation of the nearby head honcho, I'm suspecting this was a political remover and not anything else. Because up until that time, and up until the Council of Kildare, which was 1135, I think, the abbess of the foundation at Kildare had precedence over the local bishops.
Right.
So this was like a massive big deal, you know. So that was the first interruption, and from then the preeminence of the foundation at Kildare started to drop, essentially, because it was no longer in direct spiritual lineage. I feel like doing the bunny quotes on this one, right? Because the spiritual lineage thing is a bit dodgy, but it wasn't in the direct lineage from Brigid after that. Then what happened was, in the 16th century, Henry VIII of England, who was at that time claiming to be ruler of Ireland as well.
He wasn't exactly Ireland's best friend, though, was he?
He was not Ireland's best friend. I mean, he wasn't as bad as some of the ones that came after him, but like he wasn't up there in the ones that we could safely ignore either. Anyway, there's a whole big long convoluted story, but essentially he was a randy bugger, and he also claimed to be extremely religious, so he couldn't go around sleeping with women who weren't his wife, and he wanted to sleep with Anne Boleyn, but he was still married to Catherine of Aragon, so basically he created a new church. Now, he claimed it was to reform the Catholic Church, which, to be fair, had some major issues at that time as well.
Still does.
Yeah. Well, you know, they cleaned up some of the ones back then, and then they developed whole new ones over the last 5 or 6 centuries. But, you know, we live in hope they might do something again. But anyway, he as part of that, he started closing down monasteries and religious establishments because he could then claim those establishments for the crown. And it was at that time that the foundation in Kildare actually fully shut down. Now, there are stories, and the one I read most recently was from Giraldus, who was a Welsh lad back in the 12th century, that there were a community of 19 nuns in Kildare, and that they tended the fire for 19 nights. On the 20th night, the nun said a prayer over it and said, "Brigid, you look after it now for the next 24 hours, essentially." In fancier language now, Laura, but that was the basis of it.
Yeah,
and this appears to be, oh, Jesus, was he? And there are kind of elements of his story that would link back to something like the Vestal Virgins in Rome, which is why I'm a little bit suspicious about it, because the Vestal Virgins were definitely pagan, and it was Henry II in the 12th century. This is just before the Norman invasion, and I have a feeling there was a bit of propaganda going on here. That, you know, I know these women are claiming to be nuns, but like, have you seen the comparison here? You know, that kind of lining up and linkage and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and in fairness, that lad now had some pretty wild claims around Ireland. So are you telling me that that's the basis for the
it's
modern...
the basis? Well, it's some of the basis, certainly.
Right.
There, you see, the problem is that after 8 or 9 centuries, it's kind of hard to say for definite, and I haven't found anywhere else that it says specifically 19 days and then on the 20th, and I haven't found anywhere else where they're saying specifically about tending the flame. Most of the time when you read it, it tends to be kind of private practices, you know, so not so much secret, but more that, you know, when you're accepted part in these activities. I haven't found anything that explicitly calls out the 19 and the 20 and all the rest of it.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean it's not out there, and if somebody has better sources on it, more than willing to engage with that. But that's where we're at now. So it appears that our current flame tending practice is based on that.
Right.
Now, there's a few things that kind of concern me about this. The first one is that we're depending on the reports of a very untrustworthy chronicler with Giraldus. You know,
he perpetuated quite a few derisory tropes about the Irish, and there was a lot of, like, just all of this aside, there was a lot of like politicking that that his work was specifically designed for. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't use the word propaganda lightly. You know, he was painting a picture. He was, you know, getting people riled up, basically. So, bit of an issue. Coming from a more practical standpoint, right? You and I are both Irish. We know what the weather is like around here. Yeah. Letting a fire go out and then trying to start a new fire with damp wood, damp turf, damp kindling, damp everything is difficult at best and near impossible at worst. So, you know, there is a part of me here that's kind of thinking, was this just a practice that grew out of practicality, that you've got to keep the fire going throughout the night?
And that would very much tie in with the folk tradition of, you know, like, for anybody who's not familiar, our primary within the Irish countryside, really, the common folk, definitely doing the bunny ears there. In cottages all over Ireland, the primary fuel would have been turf, and with turf, it's very easy to you know, bank down a fire when everybody's going to bed and lay sods of turf across it, and basically the fire smolders for the night, you know. So it's not a case that, you know, I think when people hear about how common this practice was in Ireland, of just keeping this like perpetual flame, we're all on the bunny ears today, the perpetual flame going within a hearth and a home. It was actually very simple, because you'd get up in the morning and there'd still be like the turf on top would have burnt, smoldered underneath, and the heart of the fire would still be going, and whatever bits hadn't burned, you just kind of scooped into the main heart to the fire, added some fresh kindling sometimes, but often just more turf, and it would take off again, you know. So this was a very common and integral practice really in our hearts and our homes. And the only time a fire would have been really cleared out would have been, according to tradition, would have been at certain fire festivals really, where the hearth fires had to go cold, and then a new fire would be lit from a communal source, or just relit the next day, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember my grandmother, you know, well, both grandmothers, you know, banking the fire before they go to bed at night, and it's still being lit in the next morning. And that was with modern ranges, never mind the old hearth fires.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a tradition that has died out centuries ago.
No, no.
It's one that quite probably still goes on in a lot of houses, you know, because
if I had an open fire, and this is the first house that I haven't had an open fire in. It's a rented house, and I like until we moved in here, this was this was my practice. I would do this every night, because, you know, getting up to a cold house is a pain in the hole. And in Ireland, as Orla has referenced the weather, it's cold and damp for most of the year, and our houses can get a bit damp.
They can indeed.
Yeah.
And this is in modern days with insulation, with the possibility of central heating, with, you know, there's still nothing that beats an open fire to heat you up, like, you know, especially coming in for the rain. So I have it here that, like, it's just in the back of my head that this could be a very kind of practical endeavor, rather than something that was inherently spiritual in nature. Now, that's not to say that we can't develop new traditions. Of course we can develop new traditions. It's a living tradition we're working with here.
Yeah.
But
and they're also not mutually exclusive, in fairness. Like, you know, you could have a very practical tradition that also had a spiritual element to it, or vice versa.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, you know, taking care of wells is a perfect example of that, like, you know. But saying that it's a kind of an ancient tradition that goes back to, we can't say that this is linked certainly to the deity Brigid. I mean, there's rumors in this that these nuns took over from a previous pagan foundation, but there's nothing really concrete about that. You know, it's folktale and supposition, and there's no historical evidence for it, as far as I'm aware.
It would
So, you
probably
know,
make
we just
sense,
need to
though.
be careful about what we're claiming.
Yeah.
There was probably something there. I can't imagine that the saint would have just, like, if there was something conveniently there that she could kind of build on top of, why would she start from fresh? And particularly in relation to the way that Christianity kind of developed in Ireland, because it was it wasn't imposed on us as such in the way that it was in other countries. It was a kind of a syncretic growth between paganism and Christianity for a few centuries. So, you know, a house of learning, you know, to this day, learning is still important in this country. And so that the learning would have been approved of and supported regardless of the source of the theology, kind of thing, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is. So what kind of ideas then are in the modern neo-pagan? And I'm not trying to burn anybody, but like within the modern neo-pagan traditions, there's been some kind of, I know it's kind of grated on me, but I felt like I didn't know enough about, I'm not a Brigid person, you know. Huge respect for Brigid. Do not need another deity on our altar.
One at a time's enough, let's face it.
Yes. The Morrigan has my soul, quite literally. But yeah, so I felt like I didn't know enough about the traditions of Brigid, either pagan or saint, to kind of have an opinion, which is why I'm talking to you. But there's been a couple of things that have really kind of struck me, as a couple of times, I suppose, rather than specific things, where like people are treating this as it looks like they're treating this as like their entire practice is just this. And for me, you know, with my own relationships with the Irish pantheon generally, I mean, I might not have, and I lie, I don't just have the Morrigan is there, there's Maeve, There's the Dagda. He's fucking crept up onto my altar too. Manannán is there, represented by stones and sea. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't need another deity. And of course, John's Dagda cauldron is down here. But so, like, we're good. We have our quota sorted, right? I cannot afford more alcoholic devotions.
The problem is, you see, they just invite the family to stay every now and again, Laura.
I joking. And nobody needs to take that as a challenge. I'm just saying, right? But yeah, like, it's for me, relationship with Irish deities is such a holistic practice. It's such, we were talking about scope creep about our books earlier on, and that's actually a very apt. Like, it kind of spreads and bleeds into everything, even if you try and keep it confined to an altar, like. Which
no.
I think that you should, and I suppose I'm a little bit sensitive to this personally because I was kind of, pagan born and bred within a ritualistic tradition, traditional Wicca, which is an initiatory religion, and would have specific kind of times and days for practice, and then you're kind of left to your own devices. Then you can or you don't have to really do anything in between, like the moon ceremonies or the Sabbath ceremony. Now, it's recommended that you do, but it's mostly kind of studying and stuff. And of course, everybody's Wiccan practice is different. I'm not, but that's just where I'm coming from. And it always felt very separated, from the everyday life, where when I'd been growing up, obviously within the native culture, and what I know now was native spirituality kind of reaching out to me and touching every aspect of me. I was going to say that wasn't as creepy as it sounded, but sometimes it fucking was.
No, it can be. Yes, it really can be.
Yes. Boundaries, people, boundaries. So there was this kind of disparity between, I suppose the modern paganism that I was being, let's call it, raised in, right, from the age of 18, and trained in, with kind of how I naturally felt about my spirituality, my native spirituality. And that is very much that kind of disparity that I'm seeing, where you kind of some people confine this flame tending, I do get to the point eventually, this flame tending and flame keeping as their spiritual practice and their spiritual devotion, and they they do it and then they call it done, and that to me is like, you're missing out, I suppose. And again, it's not to try and burn anybody. I just feel that people are missing out if they're not getting that more kind of holistic approach to it. How do you feel about that, Orla? Because I obviously have feelings on this.
Yeah. Okay, so flame tending has never been an important part of my practice. I get the occasional nudge, and I've said this before, I get a nudge from myself here, would you light an oil candle there? And I'd be like, right, fine, where's the nearest fucking candle then? It's not something that has appealed to me as a practice, and it's not something that ties in with my relationship with Brigid very well. That's not to say it's not of use. So I can see where, if you are starting out and you have no notion of what to do to develop a relationship, if you don't have the kind of, I suppose, the few decades of growing up in this environment that you and I have had, and you haven't kind of picked up the stories and the tales and all the rest of it of how to manage these kinds of relationships, starting off with flame tending can be a useful practice. But I've said there, starting off, to me, having a practice with any deity where you're limited to just one activity and that's it doesn't seem, well, I'm kind of wondering what's the point. To me, Brigid is a very, very practical deity, and while, don't get me wrong, she's the same as anybody else. She loves attention, the praise songs, the thank you, you're wonderful, all that. Like, she's not going to turn any of that away.
She wouldn't be averse to an really, devotional now at all.
Not at all. No. I mean, like, the devotionals, yeah, she's not averse to them in the slightest, like, But at the same time, she's then turning around, in my experience, and saying, right, so what are you actually going to go out and do now? Because like, this is all fine and well, great, fantastic. Get off your arse and do some work, you know? And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to change your life and, you know, go and suddenly become a crusader for something. Like, what it means is see what you can do, you know? If she is working with you, then she has a use for you. You know, I mean, I'm not saying she sees us purely as tools, but that's a fairly major part, you know.
Yeah, and it's
And
not just
occasionally,
her now, in fairness.
yeah, like, you know, they, like, our deities need us to do shit for them, and that's where, you know, the rest of my practice comes in. You know, lighting the odd candle is not even something I'd count as part of a regular practice, because it is so irregular, and it's not something that I feel particularly deepens or improves my relationship with her. Now, lighting a candle and pairing that up with meditation probably helps a bit more,
I was going to
you
say
know.
that, yeah.
Like meditation, you know, there's that old conversation about meditation being when we listen to them and prayer being when we talk to them. And, you know, the terms can be boundaries between those two terms can be fluid at times.
Fluid, yes.
You know. So if you're starting off and you have no idea where to start or what to do, then flame tending and getting involved in the right kind of group to do flame tending is possibly a good start. But
There's no
what I would
Irish
strongly,
groups doing it though, is there?
not as far as I'm aware. I know Sudas Frigga in Kildare do a form of it, but I think it's between the Brigidine sisters themselves up there. It's not public, shall we say.
So is
But
this
again,
just an American thing, like?
not just American, predominantly North American, that continent would be there. But there are people all over the world who take part in the flame keeping kills to keep it going. Now, I suppose it comes back to most people on this island have the advantage of learning about Brigid since they were in primary school at the very least. You know, I mean, we hear the stories, we make the crosses, all the rest of it. So there's an awareness that there's stuff that's linked to Brigid that just needs to get done. You know, and for us as well, we have the lore and the mythology that will help us along our journey, which may not be as readily available to people who are overseas.
Yeah, I think
That doesn't
now,
mean, yeah.
yeah, I think these days, like that 10 years ago even, that would have been very relevant, but there's so much being digitized now. I mean, even going to duchas.ie and looking up Brigid, you know, you're going to
There's mountains of
find
stuff on there.
so much, and that is, you know, that, okay, so like that was recorded in the 30s. It's not ancient, but it's very, very much a remnant. I mean, I found things in there that are hugely relevant to very ancient pagan practices. And, you know, if you take it with any kind of you know, as any kind of like, you know, living tradition, which I definitely do, and I know you do, that is how those things were being passed down. They definitely shifted and changed over the years, but like you find the practices in the folk practices, you know, you find the pagan practices in the folk practices, and these kind of syncretic blends are like, regardless of whether they're calling her Saint Bridget or not, they're treating her like the goddess was, we think, would have been treated as well, you know. So I think that we definitely have those advantages, and I don't think you're wrong there. You know, having grown up here, we're starting from the pole position, if you like, when it comes to learning, and you know, and there's no denying that. And again, that's not an elitist thing. That's just, you know, that's almost in sympathy for people who haven't had that, you know, who really genuinely want to connect into it authentically. And like, that's what we're doing at the Irish Pagan School. That's what you're doing on your blog and in your Facebook group and everything. But
then you see, the other thing we have to consider here, Laura, is that, you know, when you and I are talking, we're talking about the Irish Brigid, you know, and like the Irish Brigid to me is the one I work with. And I say the Irish Brigid because, you know, she, to my mind, there is the saint and the deity are not necessarily the same being, but there's certainly very strong links between them. but there's also links to other entities in other countries that have not quite the same stories that people could also be tapping into. And, you know, there is a Wiccan Brigid, and I'm Wiccan Brigid in bunny ears again, because, you know, the people I've spoken to about her have happened to be Wiccan, rather than she's an actual Wiccan deity, I suppose would be the way
let's
to do
call her
that.
New Age Brigid.
New Age Brigid might be a better way of putting it.
Or Neo-Pagan Brigid.
But that's a very, very different entity again to the Brigid, the Irish Brigid, you know. And so when it comes to Brigid, it's very, very difficult to draw clear lines between these different entities, because there is some bleed through and some overlap and all the rest of it. But I think no matter what Brigid you're working with, if you're doing flame tending and nothing else, then I think you're missing out hugely on something that could really improve your life a lot. You know,
pick
like,
a
yeah, I
Brigid
know.
and learn her stories.
Basically, yeah, like, you know, pick one, pick all, you know, it doesn't matter, but like, be aware of what you're doing and learn about it, you know. And, you know, I keep coming back to this whole, like, faith must be practical, or what's the point? And there is a role for praising the gods, you know. There were, from what we hear about the Greco-Roman tradition, there were entire orders of priests who were there just to praise the gods and hopefully fend off various natural disasters and all the rest of it. But there's also some very, very practical things that we all can and should be doing in the service of our deities. I'm saying this like you don't know this already, but sure, someone out there might need to hear it, right? Okay, so I'll give you an example, right? We were talking there about folk traditions in Ireland, right? Because of COVID, I was on holiday in County Clare this year, and we were driving around the back roads, and we were passing through Liscannor on one of the days, and there was a massive amount of people just walking up this boreen. The cars were blocking the road, you couldn't get by. So because my mammy is from down that way, I rang her and I was like, here, what's going on? And she goes, oh yeah, that'll be the Brigid's Well Day. And like, this is a tradition that's been going on for generations, that, you know, it used to be the day that the people from the Aran Islands used to come over and visit Brigid's Well, and the local people would meet them, and they'd have various prayers and all the rest of it around the well. But in preparation for the day, the well would be cleared out and done up and made look pretty and all the rest of it. And, you know, that to me is a sign of, you know, a tradition that's been passed down, that you care for the local land and community, because that well was valuable in terms of drinking water for many generations, because, you know, we didn't have running water until very, very recently in this country. And by very recently, I mean, you know, the last 50, 100 years. I'm not talking the last 10 or anything, just in case people are...
I mean, there are still houses in
there
rural
are.
Ireland.
But, you know, most of us at this point, we've caught on to this whole running water thing. So like, the well in and of itself is no longer as important to the community, but from a community point of view, it's still really important to go down there and do that work on the well after so long, you know. And that's a tradition that has to have come from pre-Christian. You know, wells didn't just suddenly become important when Christianity came along, and water was a hugely important resource, even if it does rain a lot here. You know, it's handy.
No, definitely. And so, like, one of the things that's kind of striking me, and we have touched on it, when you're flame tending, it's not a case of, well, it could be a case of just, I'm keeping this candle going and I'm done, right? And that's the bit that we're talking about, I believe, not speaking for you, Orla, but that's the thing that we're saying, you know, if that's all you're doing, you're really missing out, right? Where in my how to build a practice with the Morrigan course, one of the things that I teach, and I know you teach similar in your 5-week Brigid course, which runs in February every year at the Irish Pagan School. So make sure you're on the mailing list if you're interested in that. It's a really deep dive into very practical aspects of working with Brigid. So if you're kind of sitting here thinking, well, what else can I do? There's one opportunity. You can take Orla's Introduction to Brigid course, and you can register for the 5-week course. But anyway, and definitely follow Orla's blog and Facebook group, because there's loads of free stuff in there as well. I'll put links to all this below, by the way, just to make sure that people are have the resources. But one of the things that I teach in that course is to, you know, is to build a daily practice, right? That it's really, really important, because like I was saying earlier, like having the gods as part of your everyday life is just so essential to me, and
Mm-hmm.
to everything I know about working with the Irish deities, really. And everybody I know who genuinely works with the Irish deities would be of a similar mindset, I believe. Um, I'm sure there'll be people in the comments who are correcting me, but I'm judging you. Catch 22. Um, so it's not my first YouTube rodeo. Um, so anyway, yeah. So like while building that practice, yes, lighting a candle just so that you can build a habit basically is fine, right? You know, if you need to, if you have like literally 1 minute every single day to, and I think this is what you were saying about starting
Yep.
off, you know, you can definitely start off this way. If you have 1 minute to devote to your deity every day, then light a fucking candle. You know, it's a great start. It really is. And we're not in any way disparaging that. Or for people who are, you know, not able for some reason to do any kind of more intense practices, whether physically or mentally or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
responsibility wise, like I have been that single mother of 3 children whose spiritual practice was, you know, trying to take some deep breaths while I was having my morning pee, because it was literally the only time alone that I got for the day. You
And that
know,
was only if you got up early enough.
that was only if you got up early enough. Otherwise, I'd be banging on the door. So like, you know, we're not in any way saying, like, we're not trying to discount people who have those kind of restrictions or responsibilities or anything like that. We're not talking about that. And I hope, if anybody's familiar with us, I hope that would be very obvious. But if you don't have those very specific restrictions, you can start there, but you should really be incorporating maybe 10 minutes of meditation, where you just sit and you breathe and you listen. And that is opening a channel for communication, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, incorporate a prayer. So you're kind of trying to get their attention first. You light the candle, you say a little prayer, and then you leave that space then for what might come back to you. You can, as Orla said, you know, you can create devotionals, you can sing a song, you can, you know, like what other kind of practical things could people bring into their day, that will take them beyond just lighting a candle and calling it done, I suppose. And like I said, I know we go into this in depth in your courses, but just
Yeah,
briefly
but
here.
I mean, I suppose the other thing I'll say at this point is that if you start working with her and you start kind of giving that commitment, even if it is just a minute a day,
Mm.
she'll work with you to allow more space for the time for
Yeah,
the things that she wants you to do.
yeah.
And Brigid is one deity that is she's not backwards about coming forwards when she's work to pass out,
Mm.
and she has plenty of work to pass out. But if you're looking at something, right, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to cost money. It, you know, fit your daily devotion to what resources you have available to you, right? If you have small kids, it may just be a few deep breaths, and that's perfectly fine, you know. But children don't stay at that stage forever. Well,
Mhm.
so I've heard anyway. Um, rumor has it most of them grow up,
And
and then
confirm, and they bring a whole new set of problems.
they do, but you do get to go to the toilet on your own eventually.
That's
You
true.
know.
That's true. My 15-year-old coming into me on the toilet would be very weird right now.
It would be strange. But like even without that, right? So I mean, I'm an engineer, right? I count my work as an engineer as part of my devotion, because to me engineering is a kind of a descendant of blacksmithing,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And she is the deity of the smiths. And so, you know, that to me, just going in and doing my work to the best of my ability is a form of devotion to her. And learning more about how to be a better engineer is part of learning more about how to be a better um, team member for Brigid, shall we say. You know, but like if you have an hour a week, then have a look around your local community and see what needs doing. And this could be, you know, something that needs writing. You could go visit someone, you know, look around the local neighborhood. Is there a particular area that needs cleaning up? Are there groups you can join? You know,
Is there a
there's
women's
all
aid that needs volunteering?
absolutely, you know, I mean, like I have always wondered who cleans the toilets in the local women's refuge. Do you know? And like it's not always the most exciting and dramatic of work, but it's still work that needs to get done, and it is part of a devotional aspect. You know, it's like it's really really easy to kind of fall into the trap of thinking that praying and meditating is all you can do. There are times in life when it is all you can do, but there's also a whole rake of other things that you can do. And predominantly what they're looking at, for me, for Brigid, look at your environment, look at your community, look at what's around you that just needs to get sorted out. And then if you're not the person who can sort it out, find out who is and support them in doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and this can be a major national event if that's what's called for, or it can literally be three friends getting together to clean up a well.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's whatever is most appropriate for what you are capable of doing.
Yeah.
But all those opportunities are out there. They
Yeah.
really are.
Yeah, and I mean, for those not in Ireland as well, like, you know, we don't have any local wells.
Oh, you
What's
do,
your
trust me.
local? Yeah, well, you, but also, what's your local water source like? Is there, you know, is there a clean, like, you know, the spirit of the well tradition is making sure that, like, the practical spirit of the well tradition is making sure that the community has access to clean water. Like, what have you been doing for Flint? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, where do you know where your local women's refuge is? Like, there's so many stories of Brigid where she's helping or supporting women, um you know, and as a, like, as a female presenting person, you know, the same Brigid, certainly a female presenting person in a very male dominated profession, like,
Mm-hmm.
are there other female presenting people in male dominated professions such as politics that you could be supporting? You know, all of those I would see as being very in line with the Brigid stories, the Brigid mythos, you know, the spirit of that kind of practical work for Saint Brigid or the goddess Brigid, both. um you know, and I think those are kind of connections. If you, again, if you don't know the stories, if you're not doing, like, I mean, maybe make 15 minutes of research part of your daily devotional, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely. Learning is a huge part of
Yeah.
devotional practice.
Yeah, yeah. And then and you will start to see how you can put that into practice then in the ways that we've been talking about. But those are some very practical suggestions, I think, that you know, really take things beyond flame keeping.
It could be something as small as realizing a friend or an acquaintance just needs someone's ear to talk into.
Yeah,
You know, that can be an act of devotion.
yeah.
It could be, you know, telling your mom you appreciate, you know, her cooking dinner or cleaning your room, or, you know, like these
Giving
are
birth
these
to
are
you.
well, you know, minor small details like this. It could be looking around and thinking, you know, okay, what I've got 10 minutes. What's possible right
Mhm,
now? Can I plan something? Can I donate money? Can I, you
mhm.
know, call somebody?
Can I signal boost? Can I?
Yeah.
Mhm,
I mean, like I know that there's the whole armchair activism thing and, you know, all that sort of thing, but, you know, sometimes if all you can do is signal boost, then that's a perfectly acceptable action to do,
mhm,
you know, and go for it, because
mhm,
raising awareness about issues that are important, it's required to
mhm.
get things changed.
Yeah. And sometimes 10 minutes of having a difficult conversation with somebody can really bring significant changes, you know, both for them and for all the people around them then, you know. Like
Well, I think
that
the last couple of referendums in Ireland have proved that, like,
absolutely. That
you know.
you know, that spreads, and that's how grassroots activism happens. And that's very much in line with the Irish traditions. And as Orla said, like, that's how we've got so much significant change in the last 20 years in Ireland, is taking 10 minutes to have a conversation with somebody that you
Hmm.
love, you know, um, asking them a difficult question and really hearing them, you know, but also then presenting an alternative, you know, if that's required. Um, being willing to educate, being willing to spend your energy to argue sometimes, but to um, you know, to provide resources, and
Yeah.
obviously doing the learning yourself and having those resources to hand so that you can have those conversations. You know, all of this is all the holistic thing that I was talking about.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, there's I don't think there's a, sorry, that the statue is just behind the laptop, that's why I'm staring at her. Um I don't think there's a portion of my life that she's not involved in at this point. You know, I've talked about work. There's like a lot of my time outside of work is still spent in some way connecting to her. You know, it's it's not that I'm saying that my entire life is lived perfectly, but you know, to my mind, like we're here on this earth for a very short period of time, and to me, it would make more sense to leave it a better place as far as we can than a worse place. And she's very pro that kind of activity, you know, making things better. Like she's a born engineer, you know.
Mm.
it's it's not perfect, then get back to it again,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of this stuff, like you say, it's not overnight change.
Mm.
It's both within ourselves. You know, you don't just suddenly jump from, oh hey, I've heard about this new deity called Brigid, to being full on 24/7, you know, Brigid focused.
Yeah.
But you can build that up slowly, and it can take days, weeks, months, or years. It doesn't matter,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, knowing yourself and knowing what you're capable of, knowing what your resources are, and then feeding that into what you want your practice to be.
Absolutely. And like any kind of devotion to any kind of Irish deity, certainly, and like is about building those relationships. And that is most often a lifetime relationship. I mean, sometimes you have deities that you work with for a certain amount of time, and then, you know, it's not useful for you, or it's not useful for them anymore. And you can have a parting of the ways, definitely, that kind of work done. But yeah, it is that kind of lifetime, you know, as we said, the holistic kind of approach to things, the everyday, you know, and it's not that if you miss today, you're a bad fucking pagan or anything. You know, I'm not saying that. Nobody's
It's
saying that.
no, it just that it tends to bleed into whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, like, so if you're doing kind of community outreach work or whatever, and you know, in your spare time you're writing up procedures or something for some sort of volunteer organization or whatever, you tend to find yourself thinking that the practices that you're endorsing outside of work feed into your day job, so to speak,
Mm.
because it's just a better way to live.
Mm.
And it saves you having to compartmentalize, it saves you having to think about the ethics or the right thing to do,
Mm.
you know, and putting that in a holistic sense for yourself and building that for yourself.
Mm.
Look, if you say to yourself, right, I'm going to meditate every single day for the rest of my life, I'm going to tell you now, there's a fair good chance you're not going to make that standard for yourself,
Mm.
right? So cut yourself some slack, because you'll be
Yeah.
sick, there'll be something going on in the world, you know. It doesn't work like that. But building up that kind of daily practice so that the majority of days you check in at some point to do
Yeah.
this, then that's a lot more sensible.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be those kind of 3 deep breaths while you're on the loo before you go to
Yeah,
bed. Oh shit, I haven't done it today. You know, well, as soon as you think that, just do something, you know.
yeah.
Like my partner John will talk about not having a relationship with the Morrigan, but like he still does his finger gun salute every time he's walking by, you know. And so technically he doesn't have a relationship with Morrigan, but he's still respectful and he still checks in with her, you know. So
I don't know. I mean, my darling husband does not follow the Irish deities at all, and yet most times he comes in the room where the statue is, and he'll touch it in some way, shape, or form.
yeah.
You know, and it's not like it's just a hi, I see you,
Mm,
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
an
And
acknowledgement.
some days that's all we have, you know, and some
Yeah,
days that's all we can do, and that's okay, you know. But having those kind of goals, you know, having an intent to build up to a sustaining, wholesome, you know, aligned kind of life is definitely would definitely be my experience of the gods. And you know, even keeping Bridget's traditional kind of, not themes, what's the word I'm looking for,
areas of interest.
areas of interest, thank you. You know, in mind, you've got blacksmithing, so you know, creation of useful things, practical things, sometimes beautiful things, you know, artwork, skills, craft, engineering, you know, all like functional, like improving the functionality of things, like all of that comes under, like, you know, a lot of modern people will be talking about blacksmithing and kind of, well, I can just ignore that one. But actually, no, you fucking can't, because technology comes under that now, you know, like if like there's so much that comes under that now.
Oh yeah, systems and processes, to go into business speak for a
Absolutely.
minute. You know, making things more efficient, making things run better, run smoother. You know, there's entire departments in most companies
Yeah,
looking at this, most
yeah,
large companies
yeah, yeah,
looking at this, and
yeah.
that's all part of what she does.
Absolutely. And then you've got, you know, poetry, which is more along the arts side of things rather than the crafts, definitely. But like, it doesn't have to be writing poems. It can be any kind of like, you know, inspired artwork, creativity, all that kind of stuff. Like, poetry is actually a very overlooked aspect. We ran a course on the Irish Pagan School, the Introduction to Rosc Poetry, which is the ancient Irish form of uh, like, you know, battle and magic poetry. Basically, it was all the satires, all that kind of stuff. But it was also like, skill wise, the creation of these was hugely integral to the society, and that's the poetry that Brigid was over as well, you know.
Yeah.
So like, literature, learning, you know, studying language, as well as like the creative use of, you know, so it's not just about making something fancy or making something pretty. It's there's a whole in-depth world there really to explore. And then of course you've got healing, and healing can be, you know, we've talked about reaching out to a friend, we've talked about thanking your mammy for giving birth to you, we've talked about, you know, care of animals would be a
Yeah.
huge one for Brigid as well.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So like, there's, you know, so whether that's physical, you know, working as a fucking doctor, or, you know, training in herbalism, or helping out with, you know, abortion access in your area, traditional
Yeah,
purview of Brigid, 100%.
very definitely.
You know, there's reference to her creating love spells between couples. So maybe she's, you know, couples therapy, you know, like whether engaging or practicing. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different, when you take those areas of interest and actually think about how they can be applied in a modern context, and should be applied in a modern context, you know, it just, the scope there is huge, and she is a part of all of that. So like, when we're talking about holistics, like, you know, she is everywhere, and she
Yeah.
can be everywhere in your life, you know.
And I mean, we had a someone else I know challenged me once that Brigid couldn't possibly be involved in every aspect of life, and I was just like, okay, start naming stuff. And we just
Challenge
we
accepted.
it's like, I got you on this one. We can do this. And yeah, there's very little that she's not interested in. I couldn't come up with something that she would categorically not be interested at all in. You know, whether starting it or stopping it, she'd have an interest one way or the other. You know.
Yeah, because even something like war or death, you know,
She gave us keening.
yeah,
You know, like, she's got a
yeah,
complete, and her Ruadán died as part of a war. You
mm,
know, if that doesn't give her some interest in the topic,
yeah. As you say, starting it or stopping it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, usually stopping, probably more along her lines. But
I don't know if she was pushed.
yeah, and she was fighting too in some of the mythology,
Yeah.
you know. So
So, and like, you know, it's just there's very little excuse to say you can't expand your practice. There
yeah,
really is, you
yeah,
know. Certainly, if you look at it over a period of years and decades, then um, there's if your practice isn't expanding and changing and developing, then you kind of need to have a look at yourself and see, is this a practice, or is this just something I do because it's habit now?
yeah, yeah,
And what do I actually want to get out of this relationship? Because it
yeah,
is a relationship, you know, and
yeah,
relationships don't stay stagnant.
yeah. No, definitely. I think that we should probably leave it there. It's
We
probably
could keep talking for
around
another
the
couple
hour.
of hours.
We could, and there is, we have a couple of other things that we want to talk about. So we might make this a little interview series. I
Mm-hmm.
have been scheduling my content on YouTube, so I have up until, like, I have about a month ahead, but I might just release this as a little kind of bonus content.
Mm-hmm.
Um, nowish, because why not? Give the people a little bit something extra. No, I just think that this is really valuable, and I think that a goddess like Brigid, you know, and this is really again, like, none of this is meant to call out or, you know, burn anybody, or certainly not ridicule or, you know, disparage anybody who is flame keeping or is tending. Like, I know that we all have eyes on the US at the moment. We all have eyes on the UK. We all have eyes on the rest of the world and the impending shit show and the current shit show and all the rest of it. And there is a huge amount of value, sustenance, support, you know, all those things. This is not just more work. This is something that will be a two-way relationship. And having a goddess like Brigid on your side and in your life and having a really good relationship with her, I believe will fucking save lives, you know, in coming months and years. So, you know, like, we didn't touch on kind of wildfires or anything. And I know you did a blog. We're going to link your blog down below as well. So just to kind of keep it, you know, reference what's happening currently. I know that there's been some discourse about whether flame tending is contributing or how it can contribute or help or harm, like the wildfires in America and that kind of thing. So I know you touched on that in your blog, so we'll link to that below. And definitely if people want to learn more, you know, go down to the comments there and give us questions, because, you know, this could be a series. We'll have a look, and if you have questions for Orlagh on the Brigid topic, we can definitely have a look at that for future videos. And yeah, just subscribe to the channel and do all that good stuff. Hit that bell for notifications, and you won't miss anything, including the bonus content. You know, I've been releasing content on Mondays, Wednesdays and Sundays for the last couple of months, so no harm shaking things up and, you know, making sure everybody who has hit the bell for notifications will actually get their bonus content straight away. So let's do that. Okay, so thank you, Mahagat, so much, Orlagh. Yeah, and we'll do more like this. I think I really enjoyed it. I hope other people enjoyed it, but I really enjoyed it because I love talking to you. You're awesome.
Absolutely, it's great talking to you too, you know.
Well, slán go fóill, and we will see you in the next video.